TeaTime Chinese episode 40, The Life of Bruce Lee. Hello friends, and welcome back to TeaTime Chinese. I'm Nathan. Here, every week, we talk about an interesting topic in simple Chinese. How are you these days? How are you getting along with your study and work? What's the weather like where you live? Where I live, spring has arrived, and the weather is very fine every day. Sometimes I would go out for a walk in the afternoon, and it's very enjoyable. Do you know that TeaTime Chinese podcast has come to its first birthday? Yes, last March, my friend Scott and I started making TeaTime Chinese podcast, and it's been over a year now. 1 year ago, we wanted to do this podcast because we saw that there were almost no good podcasts for learning Chinese on the internet. We found a lot of podcasts for English, French, and Japanese, but not a lot for Chinese. And we thought it was a pity. And so we thought, why not make our own podcast? Over the course of 1 year, we made 40 episodes that helped many friends learn Chinese. We also received a lot of email. In your emails, you told us that TeaTime Chinese podcast is very interesting and helpful, which make us very happy. Recently, we wanted also to get to know everybody, so we started making events on Duolingo. Every Saturday, we would do a 1-hour event on Duolingo events. At the event, we will learn some Chinese, we will chat a little bit. If you have any questions, Scott and I will also answer them as well. I'm looking forward to meeting you at the event sometimes. Let's 言归正传. To 言归正传 means to get back to the point. So, let's get back to the point. What will we talk about today? Today, we're going to talk about a man. This man is very famous. He was an actor, and he was also a kung fu master. Can you guess who he is? He is Bruce Lee. So who is Bruce Lee? What did he do? In today's podcast, we're going to take a look at Bruce Lee's life. So are you ready? The life of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco on November the 27th, 1940. His father and mother were from Hong Kong. At that time, the child's name was Li Zhenfan, not Li Xiaolong, as most people know today. Li Xiaolong was the name that he later used in the movies. Because he was born in the States, Li Zhenfan also has an American name, Bruce Lee. He had 2 sisters, an older brother, and later a younger brother. At the age of 1, Li Zhenfan returned to Hong Kong with his family. Later, he went to school with his older brother. When he was young, Li was not in good health and often fell ill. So his father made him learn Tai Chi and get more physical exercise. Tai Chi in Chinese, or Tai Chi in English, is a kind of Chinese martial arts. But Li didn't like school. He often skipped classes and got himself into street fights. But Li's health wasn't so good, and people often beat him up. So later, he wanted to learn Kung Fu. He went to a master and learned Kung Fu from this master. Do you know who this master is? This master's name is Ye Wen. Ye Wen was from Canton. In Cantonese, Ye Wen's name is Ip Man. Have you heard of him now? Many people have heard of Ip Man because there have been several Ip Man movies since then. So Li started to learn Kung Fu from Ip Man, And after learning Kung Fu, Lee was no longer afraid of street fighting because, while fighting, he could always use his Kung Fu skills. But his master didn't want him to get into fights on the street. Ip Man wanted Lee to compete in Kung Fu tournaments. At the age of 17, Lee took part in a Kung Fu competition and won the first prize. Lee's father was an actor, so when he was young, Lee also appeared in several movies. Everybody liked Lee's movies so much that he was becoming more and more famous. At that time, in those advertisements for the movies, people would call him first Li Ming, then Li Long, and finally Li Xiaolong. Now people know his name by Li Xiaolong, but that's not his real name. His real name is Li Zhenfan. At the age of 19, Bruce Lee's family decided to send him to schools in the US. At university in the United States, he studied theater. He also opened a Kung Fu classroom in the university to teach Americans Kung Fu. He taught Kung Fu and practiced Kung Fu himself, so he made some rapid progress. At that time, some Chinese people living in the States did not like Bruce Lee because many of his students were American. These Chinese people said that Kung Fu was Chinese and should not be taught to the Americans. But Bruce Lee was not intimidated. He continued to teach in his own Kung Fu classroom. Some American movie directors have also heard of Bruce Lee's name. They hired Bruce Lee to appear in several American movies.
It's a good thing those guys are on our side, even though they don't know it.
However, at the age of 30, Bruce Lee decided to return to Hong Kong and continue to make movies there. Do you know that at that time, practically nobody watched Hong Kong movies or movies in Cantonese? But when Bruce Lee came back, everything changed. In 1971, Bruce Lee made a film called The Big Boss. In this movie, Bruce Lee showed Hong Kong people his Kung Fu, and this film soon became very famous. In mainland, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, everybody knew the name Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee also continued to make Kung Fu movies. In 1972, Bruce Lee made two movies. They were Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon. In 1973, Bruce Lee made the film Enter the Dragon. He was going to make another film called Game of Death. But while he was making the movie, Bruce Lee suddenly fell ill and went to the hospital. After 1 week in the hospital, Bruce Lee came out. But only 2 months later, another unexpected accident happened. On the 20th of July 1973, Bruce Lee was planning to have dinner with someone to discuss continuing making movies. At 7 p.m., Lee suddenly said that he had a headache and he could not make it to the dinner and needed to rest for a while. At this time, a Taiwanese actress who was with him gave Bruce Lee a pill for the headache. Bruce Lee took the pill and rested at the Taiwanese actress's home. The Taiwanese actress stayed at home to accompany Lee. At 8:30 p.m., he went to see Bruce Lee and saw that he was still sleeping. At 9 p.m., Bruce Lee was still sleeping. The actress called Bruce Lee's name, but he did not answer. At 10 p.m., people called for a doctor to see Bruce Lee. At 11 p.m., he was admitted to the hospital. At 11:38 p.m., the doctor said that Bruce Lee had passed away. Bruce Lee was 32 years old when he passed away. Today, we still don't know why Bruce Lee died so young. Some say it was because he practiced Kung Fu so hard that he got sick. Some say that it was because of the pill that the Taiwanese actress gave to him that night. Although Bruce Lee died very young, he was one of the most famous and awesome actors in Hong Kong. In the old days, there were very few Chinese people in American Hollywood films. Bruce Lee was probably one of the first Chinese people in Hollywood movies. Also, because of him, Hong Kong's Kung Fu movies became more and more famous. Nowadays, if we talk about Hong Kong movies, we all think of Bruce Lee's Kung Fu movies.
Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Bruce Lee's wife is an American. They have 2 children, a daughter and a son. They all live in America. So this is the life of Bruce Lee. After listening to today's podcast, have you learned more about Bruce Lee? Have you ever seen a Bruce Lee movie? Have you ever seen Bruce Lee perform Kung Fu? Why do you think Bruce Lee died so young? These are the questions for today. You can write to us by email and let us know. We'll also be putting this episode on YouTube soon, so feel free to leave a comment on YouTube as well. So, that's all for today's episode of TeaTime Chinese. Thank you all for listening and for your support. We'll see you next time. This is a TeaTime Chinese production. For more information, please visit teatimechinese.com.